Okay, there it is. Yeah. Okay, okay. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Alaska Book Week 2025, sponsored by the Alaska Center for the Book. I'm Charles Wohlforth. I'm a longtime author of journalism and books about Alaska. And with me is U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who has served Alaska in the United States Senate since 2002. And we are also authors of Far From Home, which is Senator Murkowski's book, which I assisted her with writing over a course of years. And good to see you, Lisa. I mean, everyone calls you Lisa, so I suppose I might as well do that on
If
our
you
Zoom as
started
well.
calling me Senator Murkowski, Charles, our relationship would be over. We've spent too much time together, and I'm looking at your background there. There were so many good sessions where I was sharing so much of the background and the stories, but an extraordinarily great collaboration, a great partnership, and so um, it's kind of fun to be able to talk about our project, Far From Home, together.
Yes, absolutely. And we haven't done this before, so
I know.
um, at least on camera. I guess we've chatted about it over dinner. I think people are always interested to hear uh, how you originally wanted to write a book because of the 2010 election. And since the book came out in June, repeatedly I've heard from readers that that's their favorite part of the book. They find that to be very compelling and exciting. And also, it's kind of a turning point in your political life. Um, when did you first realize that was a story that needed to be told?
When you're kind of living history, you don't really have the opportunity to think about what's going on and really how significant it was. But a write-in election is always a little bit unusual, right? It's certainly not the path that most would take, and certainly not a write-in election for a federal office. Um, and just complicate it a little bit further with the fact that you would have to write in a last name like Murkowski, where not everybody is certain how to spell it, and just the process of participating in a write-in. And so um, it was really after the election was over and we had proved the impossible, if you will, because everybody said, you can try to run a write-in, um, but it's almost next to impossible. The last person who had done it prior to me for a Senate seat was Strom Thurmond from South Carolina over 50 years ago. And so uh, everyone said you can't do it, and we proved them wrong. Alaskans proved them wrong, and that was when I really started hearing and feeling that what Alaska had gone through, what we had led with that campaign, was a story that needed to be told. But I didn't know how to tell it. I can talk about it, but I can't write a book. And by the way, I had just been reelected to a pretty busy day job here in the United States Senate, so I didn't think that I had the time. And so I kind of gave up for a period of time until you and I intersected years later.
Oh, which was October 2019. I looked back at my calendar and it just sort of came for a courtesy call, and the conversation turned to your thoughts about your service and all the things that had happened. And I said, maybe you should write a book. And you said, I'd love to. And that's where it sort of all got started. A process that then went on until 2025. So it took a little while. So 9 years 9 years before we got started, then another 6 years to get it done. Um, the thing about that 2010 election, though, is it really, to some extent, made you the leader that you are today, right?
It was really a defining moment politically for me. Um, Even before I came to the Senate, I served in the state legislature. I'm a Republican, have been since I registered to vote at 18. Uh, but what happened with that race in 2010? You know, I lost that Republican primary. I won a write-in campaign, not with a party label affixed. I was I was the Democrats' choice. I was an independent's choice. I was a Green Party, a Libertarian's choice. I was I was uh, I was not my party's nominee, which made it very unusual, very different. And so I'm returned to the United States Senate um, with a with a clear message to me that those people who took the risk, voted against their party, if they were a Democrat and they supported me, some of them just kind of said it in whispers, like, I can't believe I voted for a Republican, but I voted for you because I believe that you could do that job. Or the Republican who voted for me and said, oh my gosh, you're not my party's nominee. I'm not being a very loyal Republican. It was hard for a lot of people, but what I recognized was that it was such a cross section of Alaskans who came together to vote for the person rather than the party. And so it allowed me to come back to the United States Senate and say, you know, I don't I don't owe the party anything. I am still a Republican in terms of my views and my perspectives, but I don't need to be bound by the confines of a party. And it was in many ways very politically liberating. That was in 2010. Um, and so as you look at how I have conducted myself in the Senate since that time, I have been viewed as very independent, um, moderate. You can use all kinds of descriptives about it, but it really allowed me to be a much more independent lawmaker in the United States Senate.
So the book, it talks about that and the tough decisions you have had to make um, all through your career, and certainly in the last year since we got into the Trump era. And another thing that I've heard from many readers is that they are impressed by how honest you are. Um, and when they come out of reading the book, they think, wow, I'm glad I'm not a US senator. They think that, wow, this is actually a very tough job. And it's not all about the glory and being and so it's a very unusual book, I think, in that sense, in that you do go into the tough parts, the things that you regret, the things that were not the way you wanted them to be. I was proud to be involved in a project with a leader who was doing that. And here's a question I have not asked you before. How has that felt since the book came out? Have people talked to you? Have there been things that you thought, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or has it been liberating and you thought, well, I'm glad I did it?
Um, there were some parts of the book. I mean, you and I shared with you. It was like, I'm a little nervous.
Mm.
I'm basically giving people the playbook as to where my vulnerabilities are. I'm telling people how I think, what my thought process is. I'm telling people, like, when I'm stressed, I carry a rock around. Am I going to be ridiculed for this? Um, but I haven't felt anybody that is has read the book and who's now coming back um, and thinking that my thought process is bizarre, or I must be weak if I need to hold a rock. Instead, it has been, I think, an appreciation for what you have just said, which is the honesty. They said the honesty comes through in the book. And maybe it's just that we're not used to our political leaders being open and honest, because it exposes um, the vulnerabilities that we have as humans. But when you're when you're supposed to be the tough guy out there taking it on and being the advocate for your state, you don't, and particularly in a campaign, you don't want anyone to think that there's any weakness here, and so we don't talk about it. And yet, for me, it was important for me to be able to say, yes, on January 6th, when we were racing down that hallway, when we could hear the roar of the crowd that we couldn't see, was I unnerved? Was I afraid enough that I sent a text to my boys, unsure about what was going to happen next? Yeah, I was vulnerable, and I think we as political figures shouldn't be afraid to remind others that we're we're human beings and we have emotions. We've got children that we care about. Um, and so I have only received positives from some of the vulnerabilities that I speak to in the book,
That's
which
great.
was good. So I'm not afraid anymore, Charles. Thank you.
Well, um, and there was, I mean, there's always some judgment involved in these things. You obviously don't put in every vulnerability, but you definitely need to be real. And I think that you succeeded in doing that. One of the questions that the board of the Center for the Book folks, their board suggested was to ask, who were you thinking of in terms of the audience when you were making those decisions? I mean, some politicians, when they're writing a book, they're thinking about voters and winning the next election. Others are thinking about getting back at their enemies. Who are you thinking of as who you wanted to get to take in those messages?
Well, I think as you go through the book, um, you see some of what we spend a fair amount of time talking about, um, uh, about vulnerable women. It's been commented on by a good handful of people who say, the section where we're talking about some of the domestic violence issues in Alaska, how that dovetails with the story that was going on with Kavanaugh, uh, kind of the uh, the the anxiety. It's more than anxiety, but the fear and the real anguish that women who have been victims feel, and how that story playing out in Washington, dovetailed with the story of Ashley Johnson Barr, and the tragedy with that young girl in Kotzebue. And so when you think about how we chose to focus on whether different stories, and then my very, very short um, story about a moment in my life when I felt that victim, you know, I guess again it was an effort to connect to women, to those who have been hesitant to speak up, or who were criticized when they were. I think that was an audience, but I think more broadly, I recognize that I am in a role as a female leader here in the United States Senate. I'm only the 33rd female to serve in the Senate in the whole history of the Senate, which is still kind of an amazing thing to me. Um, but I've had so many women who have wanted me to not sign a book for them, but to sign it to their daughters, to sign it to young women in their life, because the 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 and I don't know if I want to say the role modeling, but as I describe myself as a normal girl growing up in Alaska, with a commitment to a place that you care about and the people you care about, you can do some pretty great things. And so I do think that the audience that I was hoping to connect with, and hopefully I did, was women, and particularly young women, but also those looking for some level of hope that our democracy might survive all that goes on. And I don't know if we were able to do that, because right now I'm not talking to a lot of people that are very hopeful about things. But that was kind of the direction that I think we were seeking in drafting and writing the book.
And you talk in the book about the extreme polarization and the difficulties we're having as a country with partisanship and sort of a sense of dysfunction in our democracy. Um, during the time period that you were talking about in the book, and then when we were writing it, things really weren't as difficult as they are now. Um,
We thought
but
they were.
we thought they were pretty
Yeah.
tough, but now we're in totally new times. But you do have some recommendations about people getting involved and how we move to something better. And I thought, I think it's always really good to touch on those things about, like, what can I as a ordinary person do, and what is my obligation in this time. Um, and to your life has been something of an example, but we all can't be a senator, so we have to think about where we are.
Well, and I think this is where we start the story. We don't start the story with me saying, from the time I was in seventh grade, I knew I wanted to be. Oh, Charles, did I lose you?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, there we go.
I hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay, now am I back?
Yes.
They want to update my software of all these silly things. Okay, now am I there?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Um, uh, where was
Talking
I?
about that when you got started, that you weren't really planning to be
Well,
in
yeah, I'm not
Congress.
planning to be a senator. We started off the book by talking about my role as a PTA president. You know, that's not some big grandiose thing. Those of us who have kids, many of us become involved in our schools, and so I think the 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 commentary that we wanted to start with was, you're doing unremarkable things within your community, but you're making a difference. And I tell the story about, the school that my boys went to there in Anchorage, the local neighborhood school, a Title I school, overcrowded. And we just got together as parents, not as people who had names or titles, but we cared about our community. We cared about our school community, and we made some great things happen. And how good that made you feel when you knew that maybe my kid wasn't going to benefit from the renovation there at Government Hill Elementary, but the next group of kids coming in was, and how that kind of launched further interest in what more can I do in my community. And so I think the reminder to us is, you're right, we all can't be United States senators, and most would not want to be, but we can be engaged in in these in ways that help our community be better, where we can be better neighbors to one another. And it doesn't take a lot of money. Sometimes it takes more time than we think that we have, but the investment that we're making is one that is going to make us better. And by virtue of that, our community, our family, our state, and our country. And so I think sometimes people feel, I can't do this because I don't have the resume, or I can't write a big check to the Center for the Book. But there is something that every one of us can do to contribute. And I think this is something that needs to be reinforced. And I feel like we did that, again, reminding people that sometimes it's It's pretty incremental, it's pretty small, but be involved. Your obligation is to be an involved citizen.
In a small population state like Alaska, you really can have an impact. You can get involved and see some impact pretty easily compared to folks from much larger states, and you can certainly
Well,
get to know your senator.
and I know that this is an interview with me, but you're a good
Mhm.
example of that, Charles. Here you are, you're a writer, you were, you worked for the paper at the time, but you got involved in the Anchorage Assembly. You were involved in your community, and you give back and you do a little bit, and then say, okay, it's move over for somebody else. We get all that, but there are ways that we can serve, and it doesn't always have to be in a political venue. Um, but there's a
I mean, my
responsibility.
experience, I was a newspaper reporter covering the assembly, and I would sit there thinking, I could do it. I could do this better job than they do. And then I did
Yes.
it for 6 years, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I can't do any more of this." Uh, but yeah, you don't have to when you volunteer, you don't have to volunteer forever. You are start you look a little bit like a counterexample because you've been there for 23 years, but
Yeah.
it's not required. Um, since we're talking to the Alaska Center for the book, I think we should talk a little bit about the writing process. And I'm curious,
Mhm.
and this is another topic we haven't discussed. What about writing the book to you was surprising, either in a good or bad way?
Oh, so I thought that writing the book was going to be the hard part, where it's how this has all come together. I mean, I can tell the story of the 2010 election over and over and over again, but there were so many other pieces that needed to be included, right? And it can't be a 1,000-page book. So that was part of the challenge, was
Gotta get,
do
yeah.
we how do we kind of contain the enthusiasm for all these stories that we want to share. The editing was hard, and you told me, Charles, that it was going to be hard, and I really didn't believe you, because once you and I had kind of outlined what we wanted to cover and included that in our writing process. Then we had to come back and we had to pare it down, which meant you had to discard things that I had now become really fond of. And I wanted people to see that as part of the story. And we had to pick and choose. And that was hard. And then it was down to the level of specific word choice, where did I want to emphasize something by saying, I'm excited, or um, uh, maybe a term that was less kind of less enthusiastic. And it was literally word for word through a 300 plus page book. And that was after we had pared it down. Um,
I knew
and so,
finding even the time to do that was extremely difficult because you're so busy.
and you were a good taskmaster. I don't know how those who are writing the book entirely by themselves can have that discipline to make sure that all of this is done in a timely manner. Once you're working with your publishing house, once you're working through a specific calendar here, they actually want you to meet your targets, and that was hard. So it I've joked and said, because people are always like, okay, we love the book. Now when are you going to write the next one? Because so much is happening already. Just since we went pins down, right, in 2023, 24. And I say, oh no, I couldn't possibly write another book because of the time involved. But I've one of the things that I really have come to appreciate through this exercise is how important it is to tell the story. How important it is to tell the story, and to not just assume that it's going to get told. And so if you've got something um, work on it. And it's not going to be easy, but maybe it's not going to sell millions of books, but the satisfaction of of putting out there for others to see, even if it's just your family members, maybe even more importantly, if it's your family members. I'm always telling my parents, you need to be recording this, you need to be writing this down. Everyone's
Yeah.
got a story and they're all good, or they're all interesting.
Yeah, and we sure do need to do that with our elders. Even just to record family stories and get them taken down while they're
Yeah.
still with us. I mean, we've both seen great Alaskans who had wonderful stories, who are gone, and and to the extent that we've recorded some of those stories, it's a really great asset. Even if they don't turn into a book, somebody can use them later. And some of your work that you did during the course of the book of just making uh, oral diary entries on a phone, or calling me up and we record stuff. That was so helpful in writing the book because we ended up with this stuff that's right at the moment. It's not remembered 2 years later, but it's very vivid. So you
And
brought this
I
up.
think that,
Mhm.
well, I was just going to interrupt there and say, I think that again, there are ways that are pretty easy nowadays to document so much of this. So if you think that there's history being made here, there's an important story to be told. Again, you can do what you and I did, which I just kind of spoke into my phone and would send you my voice memo. It's out there in some kind of an archive. Maybe we use it, maybe we don't, but you're documenting kind of in real time. Um, and that's a pretty way to archive some things right
Yeah.
now. So
And as
it's
a writer
easier.
and as a historian, it's really a pretty wonderful uh, resource and to have that you've got sort of what was happening right then before memory could intrude and decay sort of the details. You mentioned and it's a sort of an unavoidable question of why stop when the book stops, which is after the 2022 election. And this is one of the questions that the Alaska Center for the Book was curious about. Um, was that the right place to stop? Why stop then? And do you have any regrets as stopping then and not telling more of the story since then?
Well, the problem that we had was obviously there was more to tell. There was more to tell after the 2022 election. But I mean, again, are we going to write 1,000-page book? Um, you have to stop at some point, and this was something that you and I discussed. It's like when do we stop? Because we kind of thought that there were these natural breaking points, and then what happened? January 6th happens. Then you coming to the 2022 election, and all that unfolded there. So it was hard because you were never quite sure when to stop. When I think when we first talked about this book, really the nucleus of the story was around the 2010 election, and just kind of the focus on that. But then as we were writing, more things were unfolding, and you couldn't help but include them. And so I think that's really the only reason that we didn't include more things up to the moment in time before we actually concluded the final, um, was because it just kept coming. And the stories, again, there's been plenty of stories that we could do a sequel on, just from this year. Uh, so I think this is where it helps to have an experienced writer like you working with somebody like me, where you can say, you know, this is where we have a natural break point, and we call it a wrap.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you in terms of the fact that it was actually harder to find a moment when things stopped happening long enough that we could actually write the book.
Yes.
When we look back at the fact that we got started on this in the fall of 2019 when the first impeachment was starting.
Right.
And then we had COVID, and then
COVID.
we had George Floyd, and then we had the 2020 election, and then we had January 6th. And then we're uh,
And then we
quickly
ran
on
into
to,
my election.
then you were right into your
Yeah.
reelection. And so
Yeah.
there was like, just thinking like, well, are we ever going to be able to write this book? Because we could just keep collecting material forever, right? Until you retire or whatever happens. So that was, yeah, that was a hard decision. Uh, and for me as a writer, thinking about how to shape a story, that part was also important because each time as new events happen, making the old events fit into with them as a story
Mhm.
becomes more challenging. You don't want to do a soap opera. You want to do something that's shaped like beginning and middle and end, which I feel like with you're originally getting into politics, then 2020, 2010, right in, then the whole all those events between 2016 and 2022, it sort of felt like a nice 3-act play rather than a soap opera.
Well, and I think you very artfully uh, framed some very significant stories in the book where we start out in the beginning and then kind of wrap them to the end. A specific example of that would be the story of New Talk and me going out to this community, meeting with community leaders very early on in my Senate career. I'd help them with a land conveyance because the village was being eroded by the river. And it's the whole discussion about being in a community with honey buckets, no place to go to the bathroom, um, and and just kind of setting the stage for the world that I operate in Washington, D.C. versus the real world that so many Alaskans may face, particularly in rural areas. And then we wrap that to the back end of the book in talking about how far New Talk, now McDarvick, has come with a relocation. It's not, they're not there yet. They're still working it, but kind of how out over the course of time that you see reflected in this book, we have been able to make positive things happen in some very difficult areas to help Alaskans. And so it there are some good stories where we see kind of the beginning and we are able to come to a better end.
Something good comes of all this work, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The title "Far from Home" is reflective of these two halves of your life, and it strikes me that the book was an opportunity for you to tell Alaskans about what it's like in Washington and what you have to do for the work that you do for them in Washington, but also an opportunity to tell Washington what Alaska is like and tell the rest of the country what Alaska is like. And I guess I wonder, what do you feel like are the most important messages in that two-way uh, translation that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I've talked to folks who are back here in Washington, D.C., who, maybe have been to Alaska once, maybe cruise ship type of a thing, but who read my book and who have commented to me, I loved the part where you're talking about your travels, particularly in rural areas, and how just the difficulty of traveling. What that means is they said, I thought I knew this place. You're one of the 50 states, but it's like a different world in understanding some of the day-to-day challenges, just in terms of access, moving around. And so I like the fact that we educated some people about, Alaska is not just a place of cruise ships where you come up and you have a very programmed tour and you see some nice things. It is massive, and there are people who live in some very challenging environments, but who are very rich and who feel they are rich in their culture, in their traditions, in their heritage, even though their surroundings may be pretty challenging. And then for those back home, this world back here in DC, this is a different climate altogether. It is a foreign place. And just the process that goes through, we talk about things like filibuster and cloture and terminology in the Senate that means nothing to them. And you kind of work through some of the things, for instance, in the background that we provided for witnesses for the Kavanaugh confirmation. I've had people talk to me about, wow, I just figured that, you go to a committee, you have committee hearings, you move things through, and you know it's just
yeah.
and you vote. It's as easy as that. Or actually, it was actually witnesses with the impeachment.
Right.
But whether it's a committee hearing where people don't understand how that whole process works, or an impeachment, and I get the fact that you're not going to be as familiar with that because thankfully we don't do too many, but just kind of understanding some of the process that goes on back here, for so many, it's just it's confusing. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know that necessarily reading our book makes them feel like it makes any more sense, but sometimes there's just this, oh, you voted yes. Well, I don't understand why you voted yes. And now you get a little bit more of a background as to what that whole process was like, and what that yes vote actually meant. So I do think that there was a bit of translation from the north to the east here.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, I think we need to wrap it up here in just a minute, but I wanted to give you a chance to make any last comments. And I guess we're going through such tumultuous times, and you always seem to have a good attitude and a smile, and I think a lot of us would be looking for a little hope or a little encouragement, how you can keep smiling through such difficult times. As we speak now, the government is shut, and there's just so much conflict going on. Anything you want to say for a last remarks, or maybe a little bit of a buck up for us Alaskans who are wondering what's going to happen?
Well, I wish that I had some great happy secret to share about this shutdown. I'm very disappointed that we're almost to day 10 and we're still shut down, but it's not because I haven't been engaged every single day trying to get something to break loose. So we don't have good news on that front yet, but I tell you, I do have an optimistic view, even at times that are very, very challenging. And don't get me wrong, I can be grumpy. I can be grumpy. I always need a little bit more sleep and then I'll be a little bit better. But it's too important. What we're working towards is too important to be discouraged and to give up, or to walk away, or to say these negotiations are too hard, or I don't like you. There is too much that is important to too many for people of goodwill to just say this is just too hard for us. And so I think I just need to be reminded of who I'm working for, why it matters. This is why it's always so helpful for me to get back home, where I can take a deep breath, talk to people about real things, instead of some manufactured crisis back here. Just kind of get recentered and grounded again, and be reminded of why my family and I have made this choice, this sacrifice to serve for as long as we have. And it's because I feel we can continue to make a difference to help real people in ways that matter. And it's hard right now, but as anxious as I might be about it, I have to think about them in their shoes. I have to think about what it means. I just met, just before coming into this Zoom, I just met with some of the federal employees who are furloughed, who are uncertain. There's this, on one hand, they're saying you're going to get paid after the shutdown, but others are not. And I'm not, I'm having my pay withheld, as every federal employee is not receiving pay. But I'm not in that situation of that that person who is working the phones at the IRS, for instance, who is now not receiving pay. I am not in the same place as the National Capital Police officers, the young folks who are not really sure if they're going to be able to make that mortgage when they don't get paid. I'm not. I need to remember that, as anxious as I might be, not nearly as much as those who don't understand the process here. They just kind of feel like they're caught in the backwash of all this. And so I want to be there. I want to be a steady anchor for them, and to be that rock. So in order to do that, I've got to have a good attitude about it and say, we're going to run head on into the storm and make things better for Alaskans and people around the country.
Well, you've done a lot of it for Alaskans, and so and I think many Alaskans are very grateful for your service. Um, Senator Lisa Murkowski, the book is Far From Home: An Alaskan Senator Faces the Extreme Climate of Washington, D.C. It's a great
With
picture
Charles Wohlforth.
with Charles Wohlforth, with me, and there's a great picture of Lisa on the cover in a parka in a snowstorm on the steps of the Capitol, which was a real snowstorm, and
Yes, it didn't
which
last
that
very long, but it was real snow.
and that was another funny story about being desperate for a cover. And Sunday afternoon, you're running over there to get snap a picture, which turned out to be a great cover.
Right, and I have to say, just because we're totally authentic here, we did not hire a photographer. That was
No,
my chief of staff, who has a nice camera. I'm like, Garrett, can you come and take a picture of me on the steps? I need to see if we can get a book cover.
and it turns out that Garrett's very talented with the camera, so we're
There we go.
super lucky. Yeah.
There we go.
Well, thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the Alaska Center for the book. And I guess that's it for today's Zoom, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you. Great fun interview. Thanks, Charles. And thank you to the Center for the book.